Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
Today we're going to be talking about spiritual activism, and I'm thrilled to have with me two of my favorite spiritual activists, Ami Chen Mills-Naim and Rohini Ross. Rohini is the co-founder of the Rewilders, where she and her partner Angus Ross help individuals, couples, and organizations rewild themselves back to their natural state of peace, balance, and harmony. They also co-facilitate the online rewilding community, a supportive group experience designed to help you break free from limiting conditioning so that you can uncover and recover your natural rewilded state. Ami is a global speaker, coach, trainer, and award-winning journalist and author. She has spent close to 30 years helping people, organizations, and communities recognize their innate well-being, resilience, and mental health. As our political, economic, and ecological systems approach tipping points, Ami's work is focused on facilitating individuals, groups, organizations, and communities recognize the innate wisdom that exists within everyone, leading them to right action and sound strategies that uplift and help build healthy societies in which we can all thrive. Thank you both. I know how busy you are, so I'm really thrilled that you were able to come on today. We only have 25 minutes together, so I'm going to jump in at the deep end. And I've noticed, the reason I wanted to have this conversation is I've noticed what I have experienced as some sort of discourse in the discussion around spirituality and activism, especially in relation to what we're experiencing in this country right now around race relations and injustices and everything. So I'd love it if you would both talk about that, what you've seen for yourself and what you see in this community in particular. So whoever wants to go first.
I'll just say whatever comes to mind, and then you can jump in at any point, Ami. Mm-hmm. I think, I can only speak from sort of my lived experience. I'm half white, half Sri Lankan. I grew up with a white mother. And I think, after the murder of George Floyd and the events that sort of unfolded after that, I had a really big wake-up call in terms of my own privilege, my own living in a bubble, and how that showed up for me was, I typically write a weekly blog post with what's on my mind, and I just shared thoughts that I had about the events that were unfolding related to that, related to Black Lives Matter. And, I don't typically get tons of response for my posts. I get some, and I usually get fairly neutral or nice. And this was a very different tone in terms of the emails that I got, in terms of even the comments on Facebook. I didn't realize that I was going to be stirring a hornet's nest. I thought that I was, neutral in how I was sharing it, in the sense of not coming across as actively hostile, but also just sharing my point of view. And so for me, that was when the wake-up call started to happen, realizing that I needed to say more, I needed to do more. And it was a really good reminder about how much pain and suffering is still happening as a result of racism, and that I fell into the category of not seeing myself as a racist. Or no, I won't even say that accurate. That's not accurate. That doing my part to undo racist bias and conditioning within myself, but not in a way that I was making that public, not in a way that I was speaking out to it in my work. And so there'd been kind of these separate things. And I think, well, these aren't separate. These are, my work in the world is not separate from not supporting people that are being oppressed. Yet I wasn't really stepping up to the line. And I think that's where I really had to call myself forward more and take a deeper look at my own bias, my own privilege, and my own level of comfort, in that I wasn't needing to do more than I was. And so it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I had a wake-up call too for the same thing. I was falling into exactly that. I had my views, but I wasn't as vocal and as public. And when I did become vocal and public, I was amazed at what I received back. So, Amy, I'd love you to also share what you're seeing and what you've experienced in this, especially in the 3P community.
Well, what I've experienced is that the 3P community is a lot like a lot of other spiritual communities and a lot of communities in general. You know, I'm in a permaculture group that is led by a Black man. And when he posts things about racism, people freak out. So, and I also want to preface this, my part of this conversation by saying, there's a reason why, you know, a lot of white people are very reluctant to look at racism. And I think that an understanding of our spirituality and the three principles should be, rather than a block to seeing racism, should actually be and can be a channel and a vehicle by which we are able to look at racism from a what I would call an impersonal perspective, meaning I think a lot of white people don't want to look because they're afraid of what they'll find, and they're afraid of you know, political correctness and not being able to say what they think, and having people be angry with them, you know, or doing something wrong. I mean, and I say this because this is all in my personal experience. You know, I'm speaking from the half white part of me as a half Asian, half Chinese person. And what I've noticed about my understanding of the principles is that it has allowed me to listen more deeply without feeling like if I have a racist part of me, or if I say something wrong, or if someone gets angry with me about race, that I'm a bad person and I'm like worthless, and you know, you might as well just toss me in the garbage because I'm not a good human. So, and that's the piece that I think we could look to in the three principles as a way to facilitate these conversations that need to happen. Because what I notice is that there are people who are educating themselves and really opening, and people who are really resisting that. And when you educate yourself and really open, and that means watching like 13th, the documentary, reading this book, which is so important, one of the most important books any American can read. And there's so many resources out there now that are even for free, so that we can really fully face our history and our what is really happening. Because if we don't face that, we can't correct. We can't correct. You can't correct something you're in denial about. And that's true on a psychological basis in the three principles world. Even, you know, if we have thinking that keeps popping up, but we keep kind of like pushing it away or trying to distract ourselves from it or running away from it, then we can't allow it to arise. And when you allow something to arise, the reality of something, then you have the opportunity to actually transcend, you know, to transcend. And so one thing that I do want to share, and then I'll be quiet here, is
you're not here to be quiet, so
spiritual communities are reluctant to take a stand, you know, they're because they feel like they'll alienate students, and they'll, you know, or they'll lose clients even from a financial perspective, or they won't be able to help people who need help. But we are in a moment, and I think that's the part that folks don't always see, is that we are in a moment that's a lot like the civil rights movement in the 1960s, where this work is unfinished. It's become very clear how unfinished it is, and there's momentum from people of color and Black people. And I'll tell you what, the spiritual aspect of this is so needed, because everyone's having a hard time with this. You know, the activists and the police and everyone is having a hard time. So we have a lot to offer, but we have to understand the moment, which isn't just about racism and Black Lives Matter, or racism as expressed in the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's also about this presidency, which is a presidency that has been consistently for 4 years tweeting, dog whistling, making statements that are encouraging white supremacists and violent white supremacists to be more bold, to come out of the woodwork, to organize, to get on Facebook, and so there's a way that all of this is leading to violence, and I know that people say, oh, there's been violence on both sides, but we're talking about unarmed protesters, and we're talking about, for the most part, and we're talking about Black people and Indigenous people and people of color throughout this country, whether they're involved in protests or not. We're talking about voter suppression. We're talking about the kind of racism that a lot of us thought, hoped, pretended was over. Mm-hmm. And it's not. And this president represents, even though he has Black people speaking in support of him, my sense is they don't really understand where he's coming from. They haven't looked into his background and the tweets. I mean, his campaign with Pence put out ads on Facebook that had a Nazi triangle symbol. That's just one of many, many dog whistles. The other thing that has happened is the QAnon. People have been looking into the QAnon movement, which Donald Trump supports and does not condemn, is based on Nazi propaganda from the 1930s about Jews. The same narrative of pedophilia and, eating children, drinking their blood. I mean, insane stuff. Yeah. So I really think spiritual people and groups and organizations need to take us. It's like if you have asked yourself, what would I do in 1930s Germany? Well, this is the time. This is the time. Yeah, maybe it's not going to be exactly the same, but we don't want to see what it's going to be like. That's the whole point. We don't want to even go there like further than we've gone by an inch.
No, I totally agree. And I had this exact same conversation last night. We are so much closer to what happened in Germany than I believe we think we are. But I also want to touch on something, the fear. I mean, that's so interesting to me. I bought these signs, and they were lovely signs. They just said, Black Lives Matter, science is real, everybody's allowed to live, something like that. And they came in a package of 10. I cannot give them away. People are afraid to put the sign up in their garden. I had a few neighbors that did, but quite a few people were like, and I know where they're, what they believe. And I wouldn't have even offered it to them if I didn't know what they believed, but they were afraid to put it out there in their garden for what might, they might receive back. So can you address that a little bit about the fear? Maybe Rohini, I know that I'd just love you to address that a little bit, what this fear is and where it's coming from.
I think what you're speaking to is the polarization that is happening at this time, where people are reacting not from educating themselves, as Amy's talking about, but based on preconceived notions, biases. And so people are polarizing more and more. And that's not to say that there aren't repercussions. And so I'm not going to have any judgment about someone who doesn't want to put themselves in the line of fire. And I've seen, and I've heard, I haven't seen so much, but I've heard about people, sharing things, whether it's putting it on their house or they're sharing it on social media, and, really being bullied and really having negative consequences as a fact of being vulnerable and speaking up for what they believe. So it's like, in terms of where the fear comes from, it comes from our misunderstanding. It comes from not recognizing where suffering actually comes from. And it's very easy for us as human beings to blame someone and to try and find a fall guy when we're suffering. And if, like Amy's saying, in the 1930s, the Jews were the people that were looked upon as the cause of suffering in Germany, and they became the scapegoat. Well, it's part of our discourse that's happening currently, where fingers are pointing, and it's something where when Amy was talking about how a spiritual understanding is a value, I think it is a profound value at this point in time in terms of being able to open our ears, open our hearts, and really listen so that we can um, make a difference and find that way to see what the common ground is. But I think where a lot of the reticence comes from, I know that, the Three Principles isn't the only community, as Amy's saying. There's more spiritual communities that are predominantly white that are, not wanting to look in this direction. And part of it, I think, is a misunderstanding that somehow spirituality is about not moving toward the embodied experience of being human, that somehow when we embrace a spiritual point of view, that's somehow going to get us out of the human experience so that we don't have to deal with it. And I know that I probably thought that at some point along the way. And what I've realized is that ultimately it's through that openness and profound embodiment of the human experience that we open up to what's greater than that. It's through, and it's with, it's not an avoidance of. And I think that there's a big misunderstanding that can happen, that somehow spirituality can be used as a tool to get into this state where you don't have to deal with what's going on in the world, whether it's racism, whether it's hunger, whether it's poverty, whether it's, environmental destruction. Like, there's so many areas that we can be inspired from our spiritual nature to become active and to take action and to give from that place, rather than avoid all of that and try and be in a good feeling without addressing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, I mean, you grew up in the Three Principles community, and I would love for you to just imagine what your father, Roger Mills, and what Sid Banks would be saying and doing in this current climate. I'm wondering if you could even...
Well, it's hard to know, especially with Sid, because he could change his mind in an instant about anything. But I'm pretty clear that my sense, and I'm just guessing here, is that he'd say Donald Trump is insane. He has lost his mental health. He doesn't have access to good mental health and wisdom, and he's lost. I don't know what he'd say to do about that. Now, Gangaji has been very clear about this. Adyashanti has been very clear about this. So there's precedent for spiritual teachers taking a stand and saying something about, presidents. I think one of the pieces about spirituality is that and I know I felt this way, we think politics is a dirty business, and well, let's just stay out of it. Let's just work on human consciousness. And that's great. And it feels so good. And I think there's a huge kernel of truth in that sentiment. But what I really started to see in 2016, because I had done the research on Trump and his white supremacy and his ties, was that politics is really the allocation of resources to people who are going to use those resources well for the betterment of human beings and species and the planet, or not. And they can take those resources and use them in a complete opposite direction, which is going to hurt a tremendous amount of human beings and animal species and plant species now. And we're seeing that with all the fires here and this climate change denialism that Donald Trump also represents. My father, I sometimes think I'm glad he's not alive. He'd be horrified by what's happening. And, he also had, and I think this is to our benefit, because, Gangaji once told me sometimes fear is appropriate. It's just an energy in the body telling you something's wrong. Sometimes anger is appropriate. It's an energy in the body also telling you that this is not right. This is not okay. And without worshiping those emotions, without being stuck in those emotions, I think we can accept those emotions as indicators, not just of our thoughts and where they're going, but of sometimes fear and sadness and anger have a richness and a righteousness to them, that it's not self-righteousness. It's just right righteousness, there's a rightness sometimes to those emotions. And that's the piece I think we can miss in Three Principles. Sid would often get angry with people when he thought they were in their egos, and he could be disappointed. He could be sad. So I think we're also afraid of feeling our emotions, and the emotion of fear, for example. Now, I do want to say we are still in our thoughts, and I'll bring up a man I met through just some real estate business I had to do, who ended up telling me he was in a white militia group that was going to Black Lives Matter protests, to protect, he said, businesses or whatever. And my liberal sort of West Coast California mentality just went, like, oh my God, who is this guy? But I really tried to engage him in a conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I said, well, because I've been a protester in Black Lives marches, I said, please don't kill us. Just please don't kill us. Okay. And he sent me an email later, and I'm going to interview him for this YouTube channel I've got going called Heart of America, where I'm trying to have these dialogues now. He said, it just surprised me so much when you said that. Like, we don't see ourselves like, and they changed their name from a militia to something else because they realized it was scaring people like me. And then he had also all these ideas about Black Lives Matter protesters, like we're all showing up to loot and, create property destruction. And there's a whole nother conversation there about, why that happens, especially amongst Black people right now. But he also had his fear, right? There's a lot of fear on both sides. So I would love it if we could just listen to each other, because what I see is that now we have a president who is actually dividing the country by party and saying all Democrats are evil, bad, pedophiles, he's not saying that, but QAnon is. And that is incredibly, to me, distressing. And we should all be addressing it, unless our impulse is, I think for some people, if you see all of this happening, you accept the reality, you accept your emotions, you accept your feelings about it. And your wisdom is still saying, stay neutral, stay in your zone of going within. I'm not going to argue with what someone's wisdom is saying, But I think just given the context that we're in, I would ask for more people to speak out, because people are being hurt and they will be hurt. And it's a tipping point of some kind. That's what I feel. We can either tip into something better and more evolved, or we can tip back into something that we really don't want to see.
I'm constantly amazed at, during the last presidency, I felt that we had come so far and things were on the right track and all this. And it just blows me away how a different president like the one we have can just turn that all around and just deny what, certainly what we're going through. We're all from California here right now, what's happening with the wildfires and everything else. I find it completely beyond my capacity to understand how that could happen. I think I always felt that sort of consciousness was going to keep rising and things were always going to get better. I just didn't anticipate we could go backwards this much. So, but I love what you shared, Amy, and I do. And I like what you said, like checking into your own wisdom. What does your wisdom tell you to do for you and your family? And I'd love you to talk a bit more about that, Rohini, too, and seeing the psychological innocence in all of this without doing the spiritual bypass.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love that.
Yeah, psychological innocence is that everybody is doing the best they can with the understanding that they have. And I agree that listening and understanding is the way forward. And that what's happening is that in the polarization, people aren't listening anymore. And that's ultimately how, just like that beautiful example that you had, Amy, with the conversation with the real estate person. It's like there was understanding there. And you recognize that the polarization is because there is fear on both sides, but with greater understanding, with recognizing the humanity, ultimately we're on common ground on many levels, many people on both sides of the blue and red divide in this country. And if we could see that more and have more of those conversations like you're having, Amy, on your YouTube channel, I think that is part of what creates the change. And whether it's within our personal realm, in our families, whether it's in our communities, I think that we're all really longing for that deeper connection with each other. And I think during this time of the pandemic, it's the isolation is exacerbated. And then now, at least on the West Coast, we're being isolated even more, having to stay inside with the smoke. It's a time to look at other ways that we can find that connection. And what you're doing here, Del, I think is part of that. And that's the way forward.
It's particularly hard, I think, on families. Maybe, your partner and you might have the same sort of political views, but I'm seeing and hearing within families that there is a lot of diversity, and which has been exacerbated by having to stay in together. So I think it really is really important to, as you said, just know that, all that fear is any of the acting out is fear-based, and to just drop below that, drop back into, underneath it all is just pure love. But we just get caught up in that thinking that triggers fear and judgment of each other. As you say, I'm guilty too of being in judgment of people that have come at me for having a simple Black Lives Matter around my picture. It was amazing to me what that would instigate. But Amy, I'd love to come back to you. I'd love to have you finish and just share some final thoughts. And also then I would like you both to give your websites. And Amy, you have you've written a blog recently, which on Medium. So I'd love you to share about that as well.
Okay. What occurs to me is the ideas we have about what spirituality looks like and how they can get in the way of what wisdom is actually calling us to do. I'm not a violent person. I don't advocate violence, but I was watching Joan of Arc last night because I was like, I need to watch someone who's inspired, from within and from the divine. And I mean, that woman went out and kicked some ass, And to me, I don't want to go to war. I don't want to be a part of any street skirmishes that happen, possibly after the election or whatever. It's a little scary what might happen, but sometimes you just push. Like I at this point, I'm putting up my dialogues, but I'm also like I'm pushing for the election, and I'm pushing hard. Like some people want to dialogue with me, and I'm like, I don't have the time because I'm working on getting out the vote. And that to me, wisdom is a moving target. I've said that quite often, and and I may shift totally, tomorrow. Who knows? But for me right now, it feels really important to get out the vote for Biden Harris, and then we'll see what happens next. But I just think it's important to not feel restricted at all. And before all the politics happened, before, for me anyway, it was happening before. The racism certainly was happening before. But before I woke up to all that, it was really important for me to follow my wisdom also past what I saw my teachers doing and sharing, and what, like to really be authentic to Amy in what I had to say and what I was meant to do or wanted to do. So that's very freeing. And I just wanted to offer that. And at this time of crisis, I think it's even more important to really trust yourself. And even if what you come up with is something that no one else would have, like, go for it.
I love that. It's so brilliant. And I completely agree. It really is. I mean, we can have teachers, we can have people that we respect and listen to, but in the end, ultimately, it absolutely is what our wisdom is telling us, and to trust that. So I know you mentioned the blog is on Medium, and so I'm sure people will be able to find that. And your website?
Yeah, well, I have this new YouTube channel. I'm just uploading the first dialogue with a Trump supporter from back in 2017, but I updated it with like new facts and things I found. The YouTube channel is called Heart of America, which is a top title that a lot of people use. So you might have to search a little bit, but you'll see my little picture there. And that should be up today, the first video. And then on Medium, I have a piece called Waking Up to Racism from Your House to the White House. And I'm trying to share that around just to help people understand both the racism that Black people are still subjected to, and Indigenous people and Asian people, we can see now on a daily basis. That's, if people could just listen, it doesn't mean we don't want to empower people from within. It just means that we can also let go of the negative racist thoughts that we still all have, and that so many people have. So yeah, that's on Medium. Just search my name on Medium.
And I will post it on my website too. Okay. And Rohini, would you like to just share any last thoughts in your website too, and how people can get
thank you. Well, I really just want to echo Amy's words in terms of listening deeply within. I think this is a time where we need leaders to step forward, and it's almost like there's an opportunity for different leaders to come forward within community. And a lot of people, I think, go, who, me? What am I going to do? And it's like, no, there's plenty for you to do, and to definitely get out the vote. That's something that, I don't know how many days away, but every day it's like this countdown that I see in my email. And so I think that's part of being a leader. And there's more that we can do when we listen to that inner voice within, and to not be limited. And that the inner work is what allows us to break free from conditioning. It is that. So it's not one or the other, it's both. And the more we look within to that true nature of love, the more that conditioning makes no sense anymore. And so it's like they go hand in hand. And my website is rohiniross.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. This has been really lovely. I wish we had more time, but at least we got a taste of it. And I think your message was loud and clear. And I really hope people are listening and able to vote, or excuse me, if they're able to vote in person or by mail. So thank you both. It was wonderful. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. I just feel so touched by you two women. Thank you so much for doing this, Del and Rohini, and thank God for you both.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Del. Thank you, Amy. It is nice to be in community around this. So I'm very grateful.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you're interested in learning more about my coaching and mentoring packages, please reach out to me at deladeyjones@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you.